Chapter 1. Shadows of the Cabin. Elara Voss stared at the imposing wooden cabin as Thorne Blackwood's truck rumbled to a stop in the gravel driveway. The storm had eased into a persistent drizzle, but the air still hummed with the aftermath of thunder, as if the sky itself was holding its breath. The pup, whom Thorne had called Luca, whimpered softly from the back seat, wrapped in Elara's jacket, his small body finally still after the frantic drive. She glanced at Thorne, his profile sharp and unreadable in the dim light filtering through the rain-streaked windows. His hands gripped the steering wheel a moment too long before he killed the engine. "Stay here," he said, his voice a low rumble that brooked no argument. But Elara wasn't one to follow orders blindly, not after everything she'd run from. "I'm coming in," she replied, her tone firm despite the exhaustion creeping into her bones. "That pup needs proper care, and I won't sit out here like some damsel." Thorne's jaw tightened, his dark eyes flicking to her with a mix of irritation and something deeper. Resignation, perhaps. He didn't argue, just nodded curtly and stepped out into the rain, scooping Luca into his arms with surprising gentleness. Elara followed, her boots sinking into the mud as she hurried after him. The cabin loomed larger up close, its logs weathered by years of harsh mountain weather, surrounded by a dense thicket of pines that whispered secrets in the wind. This wasn't just a home. It felt like a fortress, hidden away from the world. Inside, the warmth hit her like a wall. A fire crackled in a massive stone hearth, casting flickering shadows across the open living area. The space was rustic but not unkempt. Leather couches, wooden beams overhead, and shelves lined with books that looked ancient, their spines cracked and faded. A faint scent of pine and something wild, like fur and earth, lingered in the air. Thorne laid Luca on a thick rug near the fire, his movements efficient as he grabbed a first aid kit from a nearby cabinet. Elara knelt beside the pup, her hands hovering uncertainly. Luca's eyes, a striking amber, met hers with a trust that tugged at her heart. "He's going to be okay," she murmured, more to herself than anyone. But as she peeled back the makeshift bandage, the wound looked worse in the firelight, deep gashes that spoke of something vicious. Not a simple accident. Thorne worked silently, cleaning the cuts with a practiced hand. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing corded forearms marked with faint scars that looked like they'd been there for years. Elara couldn't help but steal glances at him. He was a wall of a man, broad-shouldered and tall, with stubble shadowing his jaw and hair that fell in dark waves to his collar. But it was his eyes that unnerved her, intense, almost predatory, like he was always one step away from unleashing something feral. "What attacked him?" she asked, breaking the silence. "That wasn't a bear or a coyote. Those marks, they're too precise." Thorne's hands paused, his gaze fixed on Luca. "Wolves," he said flatly. "Rogue ones. They wander these woods sometimes." Elara frowned. "Rogue wolves? In Montana? I thought packs stuck together." He shot her a sharp look, as if she'd touched on something forbidden. "Not all do. Some break away, cause trouble." She wanted to press further, but Luca stirred, letting out a soft whine that shifted into a more human-like cough. No, that couldn't be right. Pups didn't cough like that. Elara shook her head, attributing it to her fatigue. She'd driven for hours today, fleeing the wreckage of her life in Seattle. A cheating fiancé, a dead-end job, and the suffocating weight of expectations from a family that never understood her need for freedom. The woods had called to her, a place to disappear and heal, but now she was knee-deep in someone else's mystery. Thorne finished bandaging Luca and stood, his presence filling the room. "You can stay the night. Storm's not letting up. There's a guest room upstairs." Elara rose slowly, wiping her hands on her jeans. "Thanks, I appreciate it. I'm Elara, by the way. Elara Voss." "Thorne," he grunted, as if names were an afterthought. He turned away, busying himself with stoking the fire. But she caught the way his shoulders tensed, like he was fighting an internal battle. As the evening wore on, Elara found herself in the kitchen, rummaging through Thorne's surprisingly well-stocked pantry for something to eat. He disappeared upstairs briefly, checking on Luca, who was now resting peacefully. The pup's recovery seemed almost miraculous, his breathing steady, the color returning to his fur. Elara made a simple stew from canned goods and vegetables, the act grounding her in the midst of the strangeness. Thorne reappeared, his expression slightly less guarded. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her with those piercing eyes. "You don't have to do that. It's the least I can do," she said, stirring the pot. "Besides, cooking calms me. Reminds me of my grandmother's cabin up north. She always said food mends more than wounds." A ghost of a smile tugged at his lips, gone before she could be sure. "Smart woman." He hesitated, then crossed to the table, pulling out a chair. "What brings you out here, Elara? These woods aren't kind to strangers." She ladled stew into bowls, sliding one toward him. "Running away, I guess. Bad breakup. Needed a fresh start." The words slipped out easier than expected, the warmth of the cabin loosening her tongue. "You live out here alone with Luca?" Thorne's fork paused midway to his mouth. "He's my nephew. My sister's boy. She passed a few years back. It's just us now." "I'm sorry," Elara said softly, her heart aching at the raw pain in his voice. "That must be hard. Raising him alone." He shrugged, but his eyes darkened. "We manage. Family's everything in these parts." They ate in companionable silence, the storm raging outside like a barrier against the world. But as the night deepened, Elara felt a pull toward Thorne, an inexplicable curiosity. He was gruff, yes, but there was a protectiveness in how he glanced at the stairs, checking on Luca, and the way he looked at her, intense, almost hungry, sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. Later, as she settled into the guest room, the bed soft with quilts that smelled faintly of lavender, Elara couldn't shake the feeling that this place held secrets. The walls seemed to whisper, and through the window, she swore she saw shadows moving in the trees, eyes glinting in the moonlight. Down the hall, she heard Thorne murmuring to Luca, his voice low and soothing, like a lullaby from another world. Sleep came fitfully, dreams plagued by wolves howling in the distance, their calls echoing a loneliness she knew too well. In one vivid sequence, she saw Thorne transforming, his body twisting into something powerful and wild, his eyes locking onto hers with a promise of destiny. She woke with a start, heart pounding, the first light of dawn filtering through the curtains. Downstairs, Thorne was already up, brewing coffee that filled the cabin with a rich aroma. Luca bounded in from the living room, no longer limping, his tail wagging furiously as he nuzzled Elara's leg. "He's better," she said, astonished, kneeling to pet him. The wounds were scabbed over, healing far faster than any animal she'd seen. Thorne poured her a mug, his expression carefully neutral. "He's tough, like his family," but Elara's suspicion grew. There was something off about Luca, his eyes too intelligent, his movements too deliberate. And Thorne? He avoided her gaze, as if hiding a truth that could shatter everything. As they sat at the table, the conversation turned personal again. "Why help us?" Thorne asked suddenly, his voice rough. Most people would have driven on. Elara met his eyes, feeling that strange pull intensify. "I couldn't leave him, or you. It felt right, like I was meant to be there." His hand brushed hers as he reached for the sugar, a spark jumping between them that made her breath catch. Thorne pulled back quickly, but not before she saw the flicker of longing in his gaze. "You should go soon," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. "These woods aren't safe for someone like you." "Someone like me?" she challenged, her pulse quickening. "Human," he muttered, then caught himself, clearing his throat. "I mean, outsider?" The slip hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Elara's mind raced. Human? What did that even mean? But before she could question him, a low growl echoed from outside. Not Luca's, but something larger, more threatening. Thorne stiffened, his body coiling like a spring. "Stay inside," he ordered, heading for the door. As he stepped out, Elara peeked through the window, her heart in her throat. In the clearing, a massive wolf circled, its fur bristling, eyes locked on the cabin. Thorne approached it without fear, his posture dominant, words lost to the wind but clearly a command. The wolf backed down, slinking into the trees, but not before Elara saw Thorne's eyes flash amber in the morning light, the same color as Luca's. Her world tilted. What was this place? Who was he, really? As Thorne returned, his face stormy, Elara knew she couldn't leave. Not yet. The pull was too strong, the mystery too deep. Little did she know, fate had woven their threads together long ago, and the secrets of the pack were just beginning to unravel. Chapter 3. Whispers in the Pines. Elara's breath fogged the window as she watched Thorne stride back to the cabin, his silhouette cutting through the morning mist like a blade. The massive wolf had vanished into the forest, but its presence lingered, a specter of danger that made her skin prickle. Thorne's eyes, those fleeting amber sparks, burned in her memory, raising questions she wasn't ready to voice. Human, he'd said. The word echoed, heavy with implications she couldn't quite grasp. She stepped back as the door swung open, Thorne's boots heavy on the wooden floor, his expression a mask of controlled tension. "Everything okay?" she asked, keeping her tone light despite the pulse hammering in her throat. Thorne nodded, too quickly. "Just a stray. They come around sometimes, testing boundaries." He moved to the kitchen, pouring himself another coffee, but his hands betrayed a faint tremor. "You should eat. Long drive ahead if you're leaving." Elara crossed her arms, leaning against the counter. "I'm not in a rush. Luca's still healing, and She hesitated, searching his face. "I want to make sure he's okay. And you." His gaze snapped to hers, sharp and searching, as if her words had struck a nerve. For a moment, the air between them crackled, charged with something unspoken. Luca, oblivious to the tension, patted over and nudged Elara's hand, his amber eyes bright with an uncanny intelligence. She scratched behind his ears, her mind racing. The pup's recovery was unnatural. Those gashes should have taken weeks to heal, not hours. And Thorne's slip about humans gnawed at her, a puzzle piece that didn't fit. "Sit," she said, gesturing to the table where their half-eaten stew from last night sat cold. "You look like you haven't slept in days." Thorne's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "You're bossy for a guest. You're grumpy for a host?" she shot back, surprising herself with the ease of their banter. She reheated the stew, the act grounding her as the cabin's warmth wrapped around them like a cocoon. Luca curled up by the fire, watching them with a quiet intensity that made Elara's skin tingle. They ate in silence at first, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the distant drip of rain from the eaves. But the quiet wasn't awkward. It felt like a pause, a moment to breathe before the world pressed in again. Elara stole glances at Thorne, noting the way his shoulders hunched slightly, as if carrying a weight she couldn't see. His scars, visible above the collar of his flannel shirt, told stories of battles fought long before she'd stumbled into his life. She wanted to ask about them, about him, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she ventured, "You said Luca's your nephew. Do you have other family around here? A community?" She chose the word carefully, testing the waters. Thorne's fork stilled, his eyes narrowing. "Just us. The rest keep to themselves." "In these woods?" she pressed, her curiosity outweighing her caution. "Seems like a lonely place to raise a kid." He set his fork down, leaning back in his chair. "It's safe. That's what matters. People out here? We look out for our own." There it was again. That vague reference to people that didn't sound like people at all. Elara's mind flashed to the wolf outside, to Thorne's commanding presence, to Luca's too human. Cough. She wanted to call him out, to demand answers, but the vulnerability in his posture stopped her. He wasn't just hiding something, he was protecting it fiercely. "I get it," she said softly. "Protecting family. I left mine behind because they didn't get me, always trying to mold me into someone I'm not." Her voice cracked, betraying the raw edge of her pain. She hadn't meant to share that, but Thorne's quiet intensity pulled it out of her, like a tide dragging secrets to shore. He studied her, his gaze softening. "What were they trying to make you?" "Perfect," she said with a bitter laugh. "The perfect daughter, perfect fiancé, perfect life. But I'm not cut out for that. I want more. Something real." Thorne's hand twitched on the table, as if he wanted to reach for her but thought better of it. "Real's hard to come by," he murmured. "When you find it, you hold on tight." Their eyes locked, and Elara felt that pull again. Stronger now, like a thread tying her heart to his. It was ridiculous, she barely knew him, but it felt ancient, inevitable. She broke the gaze first, her cheeks warming as she focused on her stew. "What about you? What's real for you, Thorne?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood, moving to the window to stare out at the dripping pines. "Luca," he said finally. "Keeping him safe. That's real." Elara followed his gaze, her thoughts swirling. There was more to his story, layers buried beneath that gruff exterior. She wanted to peel them back, to understand the man who'd faced down a wolf without flinching. But before she could ask, Luca let out a sudden yelp, scrambling to his feet and darting toward the door. Thorne was there in an instant, his body tense as he cracked the door open. The forest was silent, too silent, the kind of quiet that screamed danger. Elara's heart raced as she joined him, peering into the mist. "What is it?" she whispered. "Stay back," he growled, but she ignored him, her hand brushing his arm as she leaned closer. The contact sent a jolt through her, and she swore she heard him suck in a breath. Then she saw it, a flicker of movement in the trees, not one wolf but two, their eyes glinting like embers. Thorne's body went rigid, his hand gripping the doorframe so hard the wood creaked. "Get inside, Elara, now." She didn't move. "What's out there, Thorne? Tell me the truth." He turned, his face inches from hers, his eyes blazing with that unnatural amber again. "You don't want the truth." "Not yet." Her breath hitched, but she held his gaze, defiance mixing with fear. "Try me." For a moment she thought he might tell her. His lips parted, his expression warring between caution and something raw, desperate. But then Luca whined, breaking the spell, and Thorne stepped outside, shutting the door behind him. Through the window, Elara watched him stride into the clearing, his movements fluid, almost predatory. The wolves circled, snarling, but they didn't attack. It was like they recognized him, respected him, or feared him. Elara's hands clenched into fists. She wasn't helpless, damn it. She grabbed her jacket and slipped out the back door, circling the cabin to get a better view. The mist clung to her skin, cold and damp as she crouched behind a pine. Thorne stood tall, his voice low but commanding, words she couldn't make out. The wolves backed off, their tails low, before melting into the forest. But one lingered, its gaze locking onto Elara's hiding spot. Her heart stopped as it took a step toward her, its teeth bared. Before it could move closer, Thorne spun, his eyes finding hers through the trees. "Elara," he barked, his voice a mix of anger and fear. He was at her side in seconds, faster than any man should move, his hand gripping her arm. "What the hell are you doing?" "I needed to see," she said, yanking free. "You're hiding something, Thorne." "Those wolves, they listened to you." His jaw clenched, his chest heaving. "You're reckless. You could have been hurt. And you could have been honest," she snapped, her fear fueling her anger. "What are you?" "Because you're not just some guy living in the woods." He stepped closer, towering over her, but she didn't back down. The air between them hummed, charged with tension and something deeper, something that made her heart race for reasons beyond fear. "You're not ready for that answer," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. "But you're right about one thing. You were meant to be here. I feel it too." Her breath caught, the confession hanging between them like a spark ready to ignite. Before she could respond, Luca's bark echoed from the cabin, urgent and sharp. Thorne's head snapped toward the sound, his body tensing again. "We're not done," he said, his eyes burning into hers. "But right now you stay close. No more sneaking around." As they hurried back to the cabin, Elara's mind churned with questions. The wolves, Thorne's eyes, Luca's impossible recovery. It all pointed to a truth she could barely fathom. Yet despite the danger, despite the secrets, she felt tethered to this place, to him. The forest seemed to whisper her name, and as Thorne's hand brushed hers, guiding her inside, she knew she was stepping deeper into a world that would change her forever. Chapter 3. Beneath the moon's gaze, Elara's boots echoed on the cabin's hardwood floor as she followed Thorne inside, her heart still racing from the encounter in the woods. The door slammed shut behind them, sealing out the mist and the lingering threat of the wolves. Luca bounded over, his tail wagging, but his amber eyes flicked between them with a knowing intensity that made Elara's skin prickle. Thorne's words, "You were meant to be here. I feel it too," hung in the air, heavy with a truth neither of them was ready to unpack. She wanted to demand answers, to shake the secrets out of him. But the urgency in his posture told her now wasn't the time. "Sit," Thorne said, his voice gruff as he gestured to the couch by the fire. "You're shaking." "I'm fine," Elara lied, though her hands trembled as she sank onto the worn leather. The warmth of the hearth did little to chase away the chill of what she'd seen. Those wolves, Thorne's unnatural speed, the way his eyes had glowed like Luca's. She wasn't imagining things. Something was wrong here, or maybe right in a way she couldn't understand. Thorne didn't sit. He paced instead, his movements restless, like a caged animal. Luca curled up at Elara's feet, his warmth grounding her as she watched Thorne's silhouette against the flickering flames. "You need to stop running into danger," he said finally, his back to her. "Those wolves, they're not like anything you've seen." "Then tell me what they are," she said, her voice steady despite the storm in her chest. "Tell me why they listened to you, why Luca's healing like that, why you keep saying things that don't add up." He turned, his eyes dark now, human, but shadowed with something raw. "You're stubborn, you know that? And you're dodging," she shot back, leaning forward. "I'm not some fragile thing you need to protect, Thorne. I saved Luca, remember? I can handle the truth." For a moment he looked like he might argue, but then his shoulders sagged, and he ran a hand through his dark hair. "You think you can, but you don't know what you're asking." He crossed to the couch, sitting on the opposite end, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. "This place, it's not what you think. The woods, the wolves, Luca, they're all tied together. And me." Elara's breath caught. "Tied how?" He didn't answer directly. Instead, he leaned back, his gaze distant. "When I was a kid, my sister, Luca's mom, used to tell me stories about these woods. About guardians who kept the balance, who protected what was sacred. She said some people are born with a purpose, a pull they can't fight." His voice softened, laced with grief. She felt it, I feel it. "And now, you're here." The words sent a shiver down her spine, not from fear but from the weight of them, like a thread tightening around her heart. "You're saying I'm part of this? How?" "I'm just... me." Thorne's eyes met hers, intense and unguarded for the first time. "You're not just anything, Elara. I don't know why, but the moment you stepped into these woods, something shifted. Luca felt it, I felt it, like the air itself recognized you." Her pulse quickened, the intensity of his gaze pulling her in. She wanted to dismiss it as nonsense, but the truth was, she'd felt it too, that inexplicable draw, like the forest had been waiting for her. "That's crazy," she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. "Is it?" he asked, leaning closer. His hand rested on the couch, inches from hers, and the space between them felt charged, alive. "You could have driven past Luca. You could have left last night. But you stayed. Why?" She swallowed, her throat dry. I don't know. It felt wrong to leave." He nodded, as if her words confirmed something he'd already suspected. "That's what I mean. Some things are bigger than us." The fire crackled, filling the silence as Elara processed his words. She wanted to press him, to demand clarity, but the vulnerability in his voice stopped her. He was opening up just a crack, and she didn't want to shatter it. Instead, she shifted gears. "Tell me about Luca. He's not just a pup, is he?" Thorne's jaw tightened, but he didn't pull away. "He's special. Always has been. My sister said he was born under a blood moon, marked for something great, but it comes with a cost. He's sensitive to things others aren't. That's why I keep him close." Elara glanced at Luca, who was watching them with those two intelligent eyes. "Sensitive how?" Thorne hesitated, then reached down to ruffle Luca's fur. "He feels the woods, the rhythms of this place. When something's off, he knows. Like today. The wolves." Elara's mind flashed to the clearing, to Thorne's command over the beasts. "And you? Do you feel it too?" He didn't answer, but the way his hand stilled on Luca's back was answer enough. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken truths, until Luca let out a soft whine and nudged Thorne's knee, breaking the tension. Thorne chuckled, a low, warm sound that made Elara's chest ache. "He's telling me to stop being so damn serious," she smiled despite herself. "He's got a point. You're intense, you know." "You're one to talk," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. It was the closest thing to a real smile she'd seen from him, and it transformed his face, softening the hard edges. For a moment she forgot the wolves, the secrets, the danger, just saw a man carrying too much weight, trying to protect what mattered. They spent the afternoon tending to Luca, who seemed almost fully recovered, his energy boundless as he chased a stick Elara tossed across the living room. Thorne watched, his guard lowering with every laugh she coaxed out of him. They shared stories, hers about her grandmother's cabin, his about teaching Luca to fish in the nearby creek. Each anecdote felt like a brick in a fragile bridge between them, built on shared glances and accidental touches. As evening fell, the storm returned, fiercer now, the wind howling like a living thing. Thorne lit lanterns, the power flickering, and the cabin felt smaller, more intimate. Elara found herself sitting closer to him on the couch, their knees brushing as they played a makeshift game of cards with a deck Thorne pulled from a drawer. Luca sprawled across their feet, snoring softly. "You're good with him," Thorne said, nodding toward Luca. "He doesn't trust many people." "He's easy to love," she replied, her voice soft. "So full of life. Reminds me of how I used to be before." She trailed off, the weight of her past creeping in, her fiancé's betrayal, the suffocating expectations of her family. Thorne set his cards down, his hand brushing hers. This time he didn't pull away. Before what? She met his gaze, the warmth of his touch grounding her. "Before I let the world convince me I wasn't enough." His fingers tightened around hers, a silent promise. "You're enough, Elara. More than enough." The words hit her like a wave, cracking open something she'd kept locked away. She wanted to lean into him, to close the distance, but a sudden crash outside shattered the moment. Luca bolted upright, growling, his hackles raised. Thorne was on his feet in an instant, his body coiled with tension as he moved to the window. Elara followed, her heart pounding. Through the rain-streaked glass, she saw shapes moving in the darkness. More wolves, their eyes glowing in the lantern light. But these weren't like the ones before. They moved with purpose, their snarls low and menacing, circling the cabin like predators closing in. Thorne cursed under his breath, his hand gripping the windowsill. "Stay with Luca," he said, his voice a low growl. "No matter what you hear, don't come outside." "What's happening?" she demanded, grabbing his arm. His muscles were taut, vibrating with barely restrained energy. "They're not just rogues," he said, his eyes flashing amber again. "They're here for something." "Or someone." Her stomach dropped. "Me?" He didn't answer, but the way he looked at her, fierce, protective, almost desperate, said enough. As he pulled away and headed for the door, Elara's mind raced. The wolves, Luca, Thorne's secrets. It was all connected, and she was caught in the middle. She clutched Luca's collar, her resolve hardening. Whatever was out there, whatever Thorne was hiding, she wasn't running. Not this time. Chapter 4. The weight of shadows. Elara's grip on Luca's collar tightened as the snarls outside grew louder, a primal chorus that sent shivers down her spine. The cabin's walls, sturdy as they were, felt paper-thin against the menace circling in the darkness. Luca's low growl vibrated through her hand, his small body tense, ready to spring. Thorne stood at the door, his silhouette rigid against the flickering lantern light, his hand hovering over the knob. The words he'd left unspoken, "They're here for something," or someone, clawed at Elara's mind, each syllable a hook sinking deeper into her resolve. She wasn't running, but she wasn't helpless either. "Thorne," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "If they're after me, I deserve to know why." He turned, his amber-flecked eyes catching the light, wild and conflicted. It's not that simple, Elara. Just stay with Luca, please. His tone was a plea, not a command, and it struck her harder than any order could. She stood, releasing Luca, who stayed close, his ears pricked. I'm not hiding while you face that alone. You said I was meant to be here, so let me be here. Thorne's jaw clenched, his gaze darting between her and the door. The snarls outside grew sharper, more insistent, and Luca let out a sharp bark, his hackles rising. Thorne cursed under his breath, then crossed to Elara in 2 swift strides, his hands gripping her shoulders. The warmth of his touch seared through her jacket, grounding her even as her heart raced. You're brave, he said, his voice low, almost a growl. But bravery won't keep you safe from what's out there. Not yet. Then tell me what I'm up against, she said, holding his gaze. You keep saying I'm not ready, but I'm here, Thorne. I'm not leaving. For a moment, he looked like he might argue, but then his hands softened, sliding down her arms before dropping away. You're impossible, he muttered, but there was a flicker of admiration in his eyes that made her chest tighten. Fine. Stay close to Luca. If anything happens, you take him and run. There's a truck key on the kitchen counter. She nodded, her throat tight, but before she could respond, a deafening howl split the night, so close it rattled the windows. Thorne spun toward the door, his body coiling like a predator's. Stay inside, he said one last time, then slipped out into the storm, the door slamming shut behind him. Elara's heart pounded as she moved to the window, Luca pressing against her leg. Through the rain-streaked glass, she saw Thorne in the clearing, his broad shoulders squared against the wind. The wolves, 5 now, their fur slick with rain, circled him, their eyes glowing like embers in the dark. Thorne didn't flinch, his voice carrying over the storm, sharp and commanding, though the words were lost to her. The wolves hesitated, their snarls faltering, but one, larger than the rest, lunged forward. Teeth bared, Elara's breath caught as Thorne moved, too fast, too fluid, dodging the attack with a grace that wasn't human. He grabbed the wolf by the scruff, forcing it to the ground with a strength that made her stomach lurch. The others backed off, but their eyes never left him, wary and submissive. It was a standoff, but Thorne was no ordinary man. The truth was clawing its way to the surface, and Elara's mind raced with possibilities she wasn't ready to name. Luca whined, nudging her hand, and she knelt beside him, her fingers sinking into his fur. What is he, Luca? She whispered, half expecting an answer. The pup's eyes met hers, bright and knowing, and for a fleeting moment, she swore she saw something human in them, a spark of understanding that sent a chill through her. The standoff outside ended as quickly as it began. The wolves retreated, melting into the trees, and Thorne stood alone in the clearing, his chest heaving, rain plastering his hair to his face. He turned toward the cabin, his eyes finding the window, finding her. Even from a distance, the intensity of his gaze pinned her in place, a mix of relief and warning. When he re-entered the cabin, dripping wet and radiating tension, Elara was already on her feet. What was that? She demanded, stepping toward him. You didn't just scare them off. They obeyed you. Thorne shook his head, water dripping onto the floor. Not now, Elara. Yes, now, she said, her voice rising. You move like them. Your eyes, they're the same as Luca's, and those wolves. They didn't just run. They listen to you like you're their... She stopped. The word alpha caught in her throat. Too wild, too impossible. He froze, his expression a storm of emotions, fear, guilt, and something softer, more vulnerable. You're seeing things you don't understand, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Then help me understand, she said, softer now, stepping closer. The air between them crackled, the space shrinking as she searched his face. I'm not afraid of you, Thorne. Whatever you are, I want to know. For a moment, he looked like he might bolt, but then his shoulders sagged, and he sank onto the couch, his hands clasped tightly. Luca patted over, curling up at his feet, as if sensing the weight of the moment. Elara sat beside him, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his damp clothes. But she didn't touch him. Not yet. My sister, Thorne began, his voice rough. She was like me. We were born different, tied to these woods, to the moon, to something older than you can imagine. He paused, his eyes distant, haunted. She called it a gift, but it's a curse too. It makes you strong, but it takes everything. Your freedom, your peace. Elara's heart pounded, the pieces clicking together. A curse, she echoed, her voice barely a whisper. You mean, you're not human? He didn't answer directly, but the way he looked at her, raw, exposed, said enough. I've spent my life protecting Luca from it, he said. From what it means to be like us. But those wolves out there, they're not just animals. They're part of something bigger, and they sense you. They sense what's happening, she asked, her voice trembling now. Not with fear, but with the weight of the unknown. Thorne's hand reached for hers, hesitant, then firm, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers. You're waking something up, Elara, in me, in Luca, in these woods. I don't know why, but it's like you were called here. Her breath hitched, his touch sending a spark through her that felt both electric and ancient. Called for what? He shook his head, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. I don't know yet, but it's dangerous, and I can't let you get hurt. The vulnerability in his voice cracked something open in her, a wound she'd carried since Seattle, since the betrayal, the loss, the feeling of never being enough. I'm not fragile, she said, squeezing his hand, and I'm not leaving you to face this alone. His eyes softened, and for a moment, she thought he might lean closer, might bridge the gap between them. But Luca's sudden growl broke the spell, his head snapping toward the door. The air shifted, heavy with a new threat, and Thorne was on his feet again, his body tense. Stay here, he said. But this time Elara stood with him, her resolve unshakable. No, she said, meeting his gaze. We face this together. As they moved toward the door, the storm raging outside, Elara felt the pull between them tighten, a bond forged in secrets and danger. Whatever Thorne was, whatever the wolves wanted, she was part of it now, and she wasn't turning back. Chapter 5. The Edge of Truth. The storm's howl battered the cabin as Elara stood shoulder to shoulder with Thorne, her pulse a wild drumbeat in her ears. Luca's growl vibrated through the floor, his small body poised at their feet, eyes locked on the door. The air was thick with tension, the kind that made every creak of the cabin feel like a warning. Thorne's words, "You're waking something up, Elara," echoed in her mind, intertwining with the unspoken truth that hung between them like a taut wire. Whatever was outside, it wasn't just wolves. It was something older, something tied to Thorne's cryptic hints about curses and the moon. Don't, Thorne said, his voice low but urgent, as Elara reached for the door. You don't know what you're walking into. Then tell me, she said, her voice steady despite the fear curling in her gut. You keep saying I'm part of this, but you're shutting me out. If we're facing this together, I need to know what this is. His amber-flecked eyes searched hers, a storm of conflict raging behind them. For a moment she thought he'd finally crack, spill the secrets he guarded so fiercely, but a sharp bark from Luca snapped his attention back to the door. The snarls outside grew louder, closer, a chorus of menace that seemed to pulse with the wind. Thorne's jaw tightened, his body coiling like a spring. Stay behind me, he said, not a request but a command, and this time, Elara didn't argue. She grabbed Luca's collar, keeping him close as Thorne cracked the door open, just enough to peer into the rain-soaked night. The lantern light spilled out, illuminating a single wolf, larger than the others, its fur a mottled gray, eyes burning with a cold intelligence. It stood alone in the clearing, unyielding against the storm, staring directly at the cabin. Thorne's posture shifted, his shoulders squaring as if facing an old enemy. Kale! He growled, the name dripping with venom. The wolf's ears twitched, but it didn't move, its gaze sliding past Thorne to Elara. Her skin prickled, a chill running through her that had nothing to do with the rain. It was as if the creature knew her, saw something in her she didn't understand. "What does it want?" she whispered, her grip tightening on Luca. Thorne didn't answer right away. He stepped onto the porch, the door half open behind him, his voice carrying a weight that silenced even the storm. "You've got no claim here, Kale. Leave. Now." The wolf, Kale, let out a low, guttural snarl, but it didn't advance. Instead, it tilted its head, almost mocking, before turning and vanishing into the trees. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the patter of rain and Luca's soft whine. Thorne lingered a moment, scanning the darkness, then slammed the door shut and bolted it. Elara released Luca, her hands shaking as she faced Thorne. "Who was that? And don't tell me it was just a wolf." He ran a hand through his wet hair, frustration etched into every line of his face. "It's complicated. Kale's part of something I thought I left behind. A past I've been running from." "Running from what?" she pressed, stepping closer. The space between them felt charged, the air thick with unspoken truths. "You said I'm waking something up. What does that mean, Thorne? What am I to you?" He froze, his eyes locking onto hers, and for the first time, she saw fear, not for himself, but for her. He stopped, swallowing hard. "You're dangerous, Elara, not because of who you are, but because of what you could mean. To me, to Luca, to all of us." Her heart stuttered, the weight of his words sinking deep. "That's not an answer. It's all I can give you right now," he said, his voice rough with emotion. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him, smell the rain and pine clinging to his skin. "I want to tell you everything, but if I do, there's no going back. Not for you." The intensity in his gaze made her breath catch, a pull so strong it felt like gravity itself. She wanted to reach for him, to bridge the gap, but Luca nudged her leg, grounding her. She knelt, stroking his fur, her mind racing. "Then tell me something," she said, looking up at Thorne. "Anything. Give me a reason to stay." He sank onto the couch, his hands clasped tightly, as if anchoring himself against the truth. Luca curled up beside him, and Elara sat on the floor, her back against the couch, close enough to feel Thorne's presence but giving him space to speak. The fire crackled, casting shadows that danced across his scarred forearms. "When I was young," he began, his voice low. "My sister and I grew up in these woods, raised by people who weren't like others. They taught us to listen to the forest, to feel its pulse. They said we were bound to it, to the moon's cycles, to a legacy that's both a blessing and a burden." He paused, his eyes distant, haunted. "My sister embraced it. I fought it. After she died, I swore I'd keep Luca safe from it, from the ones like Kale who want to drag us back." Elara's chest ached at the pain in his voice. "Back to what?" "A world you're not ready for," he said, his gaze meeting hers. "But you're changing things, Elara. Your presence here, it's stirring something in the woods. In me. I've spent years keeping people at arm's length, but you—" He trailed off, his hand twitching as if he wanted to touch her but didn't dare. She reached out instead, her fingers brushing his. The contact sent a spark through her, warm and electric. "I feel it too," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "This pull, like I'm supposed to be here, with you." His breath hitched, his fingers curling around hers, holding on like she was a lifeline. "You don't know what you're saying," he murmured, but his thumb traced slow circles over her knuckles, betraying his resolve. "Then show me," she said, her voice steady now. "Let me in, Thorne. Whatever this is, I'm not afraid." He looked at her. Really looked, as if seeing her for the first time. The firelight caught the amber in his eyes, and for a moment, she swore she saw something wild, something not entirely human, but it wasn't fear she felt. It was trust, fragile but growing, like a seed taking root in rocky soil. Before he could respond, Luca stirred, his ears pricking as a distant howl pierced the night. Thorne's head snapped toward the window, his body tensing again. "They're not done," he said, his voice grim. "Kyle's testing me. Testing us." "Us?" Elara asked, her heart pounding. He stood, pulling her up with him, his hand lingering on hers. You're part of this now, whether I like it or not. But I won't let them touch you. Not Kale, not anyone. The promise in his voice sent a shiver through her. Not of fear, but of something deeper. Something that felt like fate. As they moved to the window, Luca at their side, Elara saw the glint of eyes in the trees again, closer now, watching. The storm raged on, but inside, a different storm was brewing. A bond forging in the face of danger. A secret teetering on the edge of revelation. Chapter 6. The pull of the moon. Elara's breath fogged the window as she stood beside Thorne. The storm's relentless howl, a grim backdrop to the glowing eyes watching from the trees. Luca pressed against her leg, his fur bristling, a low growl rumbling in his throat. The cabin, once a haven, now felt like a fortress under siege, its walls barely holding back the secrets that pulsed in the air. Thorne's hand still lingered on hers, his grip firm, protective, and the weight of his promise, "I won't let them touch you," settled deep in her chest. But the name Kale, the wolf who'd stared at her with chilling recognition, gnawed at her, a puzzle piece that didn't fit. Whatever Thorne was hiding, it was bigger than rogue wolves, bigger than this storm. "Thorne," she said, her voice steady despite the tension coiling inside her. "Who's Kale? Why does he know me?" Thorne's jaw tightened, his eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the glass. "Kale's an old rival. He leads a group that doesn't take kindly to outsiders, especially ones who stir things up." "Stir things up?" she echoed, turning to face him. "You keep saying I'm changing something, waking something. What does that mean? What am I to them?" He hesitated, his thumb brushing over her knuckles, a small gesture that felt like an anchor. "You're a question they don't have an answer for," he said finally, his voice low, almost reverent. "And that makes you dangerous." Her heart skipped, the intensity of his gaze pulling her in, like the moon tugging at the tide. She wanted to push, to demand the full truth, but the vulnerability in his eyes stopped her. He was teetering on the edge of revelation, and she sensed that one wrong move could shut him down for good. Instead, she squeezed his hand, grounding them both. "Then let's figure it out together. I'm not running, Thorne. Not from you. Not from them." His breath hitched, and for a moment, she thought he might close the distance between them, his face so close she could feel the warmth of his breath. But Luca's sudden bark shattered the moment, his small body darting toward the door. The howls outside had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that felt more threatening than the noise. Thorne released her hand, his posture shifting to that of a predator, all coiled strength and focus. "Stay here," he said, moving toward the door, but Elara grabbed his arm, her fingers digging into his sleeve. "No," she said, her voice firm. "You said I'm part of this, so I'm coming with you." He turned, his eyes flashing with that unnatural amber glow, a mix of frustration and something softer. Admiration, maybe. "You're stubborn as hell," he muttered, but there was no heat in it. "Fine, but you stay close, and if I say run, you run. No arguments." She nodded, her pulse racing as she followed him to the door. Luca stayed at her side, his presence a small comfort, as Thorne cracked the door open, letting in a gust of cold, rain-soaked air. The clearing was empty now, the glowing eyes gone, but the forest felt alive, watching, waiting. Thorne stepped out first, his boots crunching on the wet gravel, and Elara followed, her heart pounding in her ears. The storm had eased into a steady drizzle, but the air was heavy, charged with an energy she couldn't name. Thorne moved with a quiet grace, his eyes scanning the trees, every muscle taut. Elara kept pace, her hand brushing Luca's back, the pup's warmth grounding her. They reached the edge of the clearing, where the pines loomed like silent sentinels, their branches swaying in the wind. Thorne stopped abruptly, his hand shooting out to halt her. "Listen," he whispered, his voice barely audible. She strained her ears, catching nothing at first. Then, a faint rustle, not from the wind but from something moving through the underbrush. Her breath caught as Thorne's hand tightened on her arm, pulling her behind him. Luca growled, low and fierce, his small body vibrating with readiness. "Show yourself," Thorne called, his voice ringing with authority. The rustle stopped, and for a moment, the world held its breath. Then a figure stepped from the shadows. Not a wolf, but a man, lean and wiry with sharp features and eyes that glinted like steel in the moonlight. His clothes were tattered, his hair matted with rain, but there was a dangerous edge to him, a wildness that matched the wolves. "Kale," Thorne growled, his body shifting to shield Elara. "You're pushing your luck." Kyle's lips curled into a smirk, his gaze flicking to Elara. "I'm not here for you, Blackwood. Not yet. She's the one I want to talk to." Elara's stomach dropped, but she stepped out from behind Thorne, ignoring his warning glare. "Me, why?" Kale's eyes narrowed, studying her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. "You don't even know, do you? What you are, what you're doing to this place." His voice was low, almost a hiss, laced with a mix of curiosity and menace. "The woods are singing your name, girl, and it's not a lullaby." Thorne stepped forward, his presence towering, protective. "You don't get to speak to her. Leave, Kyle, before I make you." Kyle laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "You can't keep her hidden forever, Blackwood. The pack knows she's here. They feel it too. She's not just some stray you can protect." Elara's mind raced, the word pack echoing like a drumbeat. Pack. Not just wolves, but something more. Something tied to Thorne's cryptic hints about a curse, a legacy. She wanted to ask, to demand answers, but Kale's gaze pinned her, his eyes too knowing, too hungry. "Enough," Thorne snapped, his voice a low growl that seemed to rumble through the ground itself. Kale hesitated, then backed away, his smirk fading as he melted into the trees. But his parting words lingered, chilling Elara to the bone. "The moon's almost full, Blackwood. You can't outrun fate." Thorne stood frozen, his chest heaving, until the forest swallowed Kale's presence. Then he turned to Elara, his face a mask of barely restrained fury and fear. "Inside. Now." She didn't argue this time, following him back to the cabin, Luca at her heels. The door slammed shut behind them, and Thorne bolted it, his hands shaking slightly. Elara's mind was a whirlwind. Kyle's words, the pack, the moon. She turned to Thorne, who was pacing now, his energy restless, almost feral. "What did he mean?" she asked, her voice trembling but firm. "The pack, the moon. What's happening, Thorne?" He stopped, his back to her, his hands braced against the mantel. "Kyle's dangerous," he said finally, his voice rough. "He leads a faction that believes in the old ways, bloodlines, rituals, control. They think you're a threat because you're different." "Different how?" she pressed, stepping closer. "You keep dancing around it. Tell me what I am to them, to you." He turned, his eyes locking onto hers, and the raw emotion there stole her breath. Fear, longing, and something deeper, something that felt like destiny. "You're a spark, Elara," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "A light in a world that's been dark for too long. I don't know why, but you're tied to us, to me, and it's tearing me apart, because I can't protect you if you stay." Her heart ached at the pain in his voice, the weight of his secrets. She reached out, her hand resting on his arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. "I'm not leaving," she said, her voice steady. "Not until I understand, not until we figure this out together." For a moment, he looked like he might pull away, but then he covered her hand with his touch warm and grounding. "You're braver than I am," he murmured, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Before she could respond, Luca whined, his head snapping toward the window. The storm had quieted, but the air felt heavier now, charged with anticipation. Thorne's gaze followed Luca's, his expression darkening. "The full moon's tomorrow," he said, almost to himself. "Whatever's coming, it's coming soon." Elara's heart pounded, the weight of his words settling over her like a storm cloud. The full moon, the pack, Kale's warning. She was on the edge of a truth that could change everything. And as Thorne's hand tightened around hers, she knew there was no turning back. Chapter 7. Beneath the blood moon, Elara stood frozen in the cabin's dim light. Thorne's hand still clasped around hers, his words, "The full moon's tomorrow," echoing like a warning bell in her mind. The air felt thick, charged with the weight of secrets and the distant hum of the forest, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. Luca paced near the door, his amber eyes darting between them and the window, where the drizzle had stopped, leaving an eerie stillness in its wake. Cale's parting words, "You can't outrun fate," clung to Elara, a riddle wrapped in menace. She felt the pull toward Thorne stronger than ever, a tether that both anchored and terrified her. But the truth about him, about the pack, remained just out of reach. "Thorne," she said, her voice soft but firm, "what happens tomorrow?" "What's the full moon got to do with this?" He released her hand, stepping back as if the distance could shield her from the answer. His eyes, still flecked with that unnatural amber, avoided hers, fixing instead on the fire's dying embers. "It's a time when things change," he said, his voice rough, guarded. "When the lines between worlds blur. It's not safe for you to be here when it happens." "Not safe?" she echoed, frustration flaring. She crossed to him, closing the gap he'd tried to create. "You keep saying that, but you're not telling me why." "Cale said the pack feels me, that I'm a threat. If I'm in danger, I need to know what I'm facing." Thorne's gaze snapped to hers, raw and conflicted, like a man torn between duty and desire. "You're not a threat, Elara. You're something else. Something they don't understand." "Hell, I don't understand it." He ran a hand through his hair, the gesture betraying his agitation. "But the moon, it brings out what we hide. And I can't let you see that. Not yet." Her heart pounded, the word "we" landing like a stone. We. Not just him. Not just Luca. But a collective tied to the moon, to the wolves, to whatever Cale represented. She wanted to push, to demand the full truth, but the pain in Thorne's voice stopped her. He wasn't just hiding a secret. He was protecting her from it, even at the cost of his own peace. She reached out, her fingers brushing his arm, the contact grounding them both. "Then don't face it alone," she said softly. "Whatever's coming, I'm here. I'm not running." His breath hitched, and for a moment, she thought he might pull away. But instead, he turned, his hand covering hers, his touch warm and steady. "You don't know what you're asking," he murmured. But his eyes softened, the amber fading to a deep, human brown that made her chest ache. "I know enough," she said, stepping closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I feel something when I'm with you, something real, and I think you feel it too." The air between them crackled, the space shrinking until she could feel the heat radiating from him, smell the pine and earth clinging to his skin. His hand tightened on hers, and for a fleeting moment she thought he might lean in, might finally bridge the gap. But Luca's soft whine broke the spell, his small body nudging between them, grounding them in the moment. Thorne let out a shaky laugh, ruffling Luca's fur. "He's got a knack for timing," he said, the tension easing slightly. Elara smiled, kneeling to scratch Luca's ears, her mind still churning. "He's keeping us honest," she said, glancing up at Thorne. "So what now? We just wait for the moon to do whatever it does?" Thorne's expression darkened, but he nodded. "For now, we stay vigilant. Cale's not done, and the pack, they're restless. The moon's pull is strong, and it's making them bold." She stood, her resolve hardening. "Then we prepare. Tell me what to do." He studied her, a mix of admiration and worry in his eyes. "You're not like anyone I've ever met," he said, almost to himself. "All right, help me secure the cabin. If they come back, we need to be ready." They spent the next hour fortifying the cabin, checking locks, boarding up the lower windows, and moving supplies to the cellar in case they needed a fallback. Thorne worked with a quiet efficiency, his movements precise but tinged with an urgency that betrayed his calm exterior. Elara followed his lead, her hands steady despite the questions swirling in her mind. Luca trailed them, his energy subdued, as if he sensed the gravity of what was coming. As they worked, their conversation turned lighter, a fragile attempt to ease the tension. Elara shared stories of her grandmother's cabin, how she'd spent summers learning to bake bread and identify wildflowers, moments that felt like a lifetime ago. Thorne listened, his guard lowering with each word, and in return, he told her about teaching Luca to track deer trails, his voice softening with pride. "You're good with him," Elara said, securing a board over the kitchen window. "He's lucky to have you." Thorne paused, a hammer in hand, his eyes distant. "I'm all he's got. After my sister—" He trailed off, pain flickering across his face. "I swore I'd keep him safe. From the pack, from the curse, from everything." Elara's heart ached at the weight in his voice. She set down the nails she was holding and crossed to him, her hand resting on his shoulder. "You're not alone in that anymore," she said softly. "I'm here, Thorne. For Luca. For you." He looked at her, his eyes searching hers. And for a moment, the world narrowed to just them. The cabin, the storm, the threat outside fading into the background. His hand covered hers, his thumb tracing a slow, deliberate path over her skin. "You make it hard to keep you at arm's length," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "Then don't," she said, her breath catching as she leaned closer, drawn by that inexplicable pull. Their faces were inches apart, the air charged with anticipation, when a sharp crack split the silence, a branch snapping just outside. Thorne spun, his body shielding hers as Luca growled, his hackles rising. The air grew heavy, oppressive, and Elara's skin prickled with the sense of being watched. Thorne moved to the door, his hand on the bolt, but before he could open it, a low, guttural howl rose from the trees, answered by others, a chorus that seemed to vibrate through the earth itself. "They're back," Thorne said, his voice grim, "and they're not alone." Elara's heart pounded, but she stepped beside him, refusing to cower. "What do we do?" He glanced at her, his eyes flashing amber in the lantern light. "We hold the line. No matter what happens, you stay inside. Promise me." She hesitated, then nodded, her resolve unshaken but her fear growing. "I promise. But you come back, Thorne. You hear me?" His lips twitched, a ghost of a smile. "Stubborn," he muttered, then opened the door, stepping into the night. Luca whined, pressing against Elara's leg, as she watched Thorne disappear into the shadows, his silhouette blending with the trees. The howls grew louder, closer, and Elara's stomach twisted with dread. Whatever was coming with the full moon, it was tied to Thorne, to Luca, to her, and the truth was closer than ever, waiting to break free. Chapter 8. The unveiling Elara's heart thudded against her ribs as she stood by the cabin's bolted door. Luca's warmth pressed against her leg, a small anchor in the storm of dread swirling inside her. The howls outside had grown sharper, a primal chorus that seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the forest itself. Thorne was out there, alone, facing whatever threat Cale and his pack represented, and the weight of her promise to stay inside chafed against her resolve. She'd told him she'd stand with him, yet here she was, trapped behind wood and iron while the full moon loomed closer, its power tugging at the edges of her awareness like an unseen tide. Luca whined, his amber eyes flicking up to hers, and she knelt beside him, her fingers sinking into his fur. "He'll be okay, right?" She whispered more to herself than the pup, but Luca's gaze held a knowing intensity, as if he understood far more than a normal animal could. His small body trembled, not with fear but with anticipation, and Elara's stomach twisted. The truth was so close she could almost taste it. Thorne's cryptic words, Cale's warnings, the moon's pull. It was all connected, and she was at the center of it. The cabin creaked under a gust of wind, and Elara stood, moving to the window despite Thorne's orders. The glass was fogged, but she wiped it clear, peering into the night. The clearing was empty, the trees swaying in the moonlight, their branches casting long, claw-like shadows. No sign of Thorne, no glint of wolf eyes, but the silence felt wrong, heavy with intent. She pressed her palm against the glass, her breath shallow, willing him to come back. Minutes stretched into eternity, each one tightening the knot in her chest. Luca paced, his ears pricked, and Elara's fingers itched to unbolt the door, to run after Thorne, to do something. But his warning, "No matter what happens, you stay inside," held her back, a fragile tether of trust. She turned from the window, pacing the living room, her eyes darting to the fire, to Luca, to the door. The cabin felt smaller now, its walls closing in, the air thick with secrets. Then, a sharp yelp pierced the silence, followed by a low, guttural growl that wasn't Thorne's. Elara froze, her heart lurching as Luca bolted to the door, his hackles raised. The sound came again, closer, and she heard Thorne's voice, sharp and commanding, though the words were muffled by the storm. Without thinking, she grabbed a poker from the fireplace, its weight cold and reassuring in her hand. She wasn't helpless, damn it. And if Thorne was in trouble, she wasn't going to cower. "Luca, stay," she said, her voice firm as she moved to the door. The pup whined but obeyed, his eyes pleading. She unbolted the door, her pulse roaring in her ears, and cracked it open, just enough to see the clearing. The moonlight bathed everything in silver, and there, at the edge of the trees, was Thorne, his silhouette locked in a struggle with a massive wolf. Kale, she was sure of it. The beast's teeth snapped inches from Thorne's arm, but he moved with impossible speed, his hands gripping the wolf's fur, forcing it back. Elara's breath caught as Thorne's eyes flashed amber, brighter than ever, his movements blurring with a grace that wasn't human. The wolf lunged again, but Thorne twisted, pinning it to the ground with a strength that made the air hum. "Enough!" he roared, his voice carrying a power that seemed to ripple through the forest. The wolf stilled, its snarls fading to whimpers, and then it broke free, retreating into the trees with a final, defiant howl. Thorne stood, his chest heaving, his shirt torn and streaked with mud. He turned toward the cabin, his eyes locking onto Elara's through the crack in the door. "I told you to stay inside," he growled, but there was no anger in it, only exhaustion and something deeper, relief. She pushed the door open wider, the poker still in her hand. "I heard you fighting. I wasn't going to let you face that alone." He crossed the clearing in long, purposeful strides, his eyes never leaving hers. As he reached the porch, he stopped, close enough that she could see the sweat beading on his brow, the faint tremble in his hands. "You're going to get yourself killed," he said, his voice low, but his gaze softened, betraying the fear behind his words. "Then stop shutting me out," she said, setting the poker down and stepping onto the porch. The moonlight caught the scars on his forearms, stark against his skin, and she reached out, her fingers brushing one of them. "You're not human, are you?" "Not completely." Thorne flinched at her touch, but he didn't pull away. His eyes searched hers, a storm of emotions, guilt, fear, longing. "Elara," he said, his voice breaking, "if I tell you, everything changes. You can't unsee it." "Then let me see," she said, her hand lingering on his arm. "I'm not afraid of you, Thorne. I'm afraid of losing this, whatever this is between us." He swallowed hard, his hand covering hers, his touch warm and grounding. "You don't know what you're asking," he murmured. But his voice was softer now, almost a plea. "The moon's tonight. It's when we can't hide anymore. We?" she echoed, her heart pounding. "You and Luca?" He nodded, his jaw tight. "And others, the pack. Kale's part of it, but he wants control, wants to twist what we are into something dark. I've been running from it, keeping Luca safe, but you—" He paused, his thumb tracing her knuckles. "You're changing everything. The pack feels it. I feel it. Like you're part of us, part of me." Her breath caught, the weight of his words sinking deep. Part of him. The pull she'd felt since finding Luca in the woods, since meeting Thorne, suddenly made sense. Not as a coincidence, but as something fated, something ancient. "What am I to you?" she asked, her voice trembling with the need to know. Thorne's eyes darkened, the amber flaring briefly before fading to human brown. "You're my anchor," he said, so quietly she almost missed it. "The one thing keeping me from losing myself to this curse. But it's dangerous. Elara, the pack, the moon, they'll come for you, and I can't lose you too." The raw vulnerability in his voice cracked something open in her, a wound she'd carried since Seattle, since the betrayal that had driven her to these woods. She stepped closer, her hand sliding up to his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart. You won't lose me, she said, her voice steady. I'm here, Thorne. For you. For Luca. For whatever this is. For a moment he looked like he might kiss her, his face inches from hers. The air charged with unspoken longing, but a low growl from Luca snapped them back to reality. The pup stood at the edge of the porch, his eyes fixed on the trees, where the shadows seemed to shift, alive with movement. Thorne's body tensed, his hand tightening on hers. They're coming, he said, his voice grim. The moon's rising. Whatever happens tonight, stay close to me. Elara nodded, her fear mingling with a fierce determination. The truth was unraveling, and as the first rays of the full moon broke through the clouds, she felt it. A pulse in the air, a call that resonated in her bones. Whatever Thorne was, whatever the pack wanted, she was ready to face it, bound to him by a force she could no longer deny. Chapter 9. The Heart of the Storm. The full moon hung low in the sky, its silver light cutting through the clouds like a blade, casting an ethereal glow over the clearing outside the cabin. Elara stood on the porch, her hand still clasped in Thorne's, the warmth of his touch a lifeline against the primal energy pulsing through the air. Luca's low growl vibrated at her side, his amber eyes fixed on the shifting shadows in the trees, where the pack's presence loomed like a gathering storm. Thorne's words, "You're my anchor," echoed in her heart, intertwining with the fear and determination coursing through her veins. The truth about him, about the pack, was unraveling, and as the moon climbed higher, she felt its pull, a call that resonated deep in her bones. "Thorne," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos threatening to engulf them. "What happens now? The moon's here. What does it mean for you?" His grip tightened, his eyes flashing with that unnatural amber glow, brighter now under the moon's gaze. "It means no more hiding," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. "The moon strips away control, brings out what's buried. For me, for Luca, for all of us, she repeated, her heart pounding. "The pack. Kale. You're one of them, aren't you?" He didn't answer directly, his jaw clenching as he scanned the trees. The shadows moved, coalescing into shapes. Wolves, their fur glinting in the moonlight, their eyes burning with intent. There were more than before, at least a dozen, circling the clearing with a predatory grace that made Elara's skin prickle. Luca pressed closer, his growl deepening, and Elara felt a surge of protectiveness for the pup, for Thorne, for whatever this bond between them was. "Stay behind me," Thorne said, stepping forward, his body a shield between her and the pack. "No matter what you see, don't run. They'll chase." Her throat tightened, but she nodded, her hand resting on Luca's back. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, her voice firm. "But you need to tell me what I'm facing. No more half-truths." Thorne turned, his eyes locking onto hers, raw and vulnerable. "You want the truth? I'm a shifter, Elara, born with a curse that ties me to the moon, to these woods. Luca's the same. The pack, they're my kind. But Kale's twisted them, wants to use our power for his own ends. And you..." He paused, his voice breaking. "You're waking something in us, something ancient. I don't know why, but you're part of this, and they'll kill to keep you from it." Her breath caught, the word shifter landing like a thunderclap. She'd suspected, pieced it together from his eyes, his speed, the wolf's obedience, but hearing it aloud made the world tilt. Shifter. Werewolf. The stories her grandmother used to tell, tales of men who walked as beasts under the full moon, flashed through her mind. No longer fairy tales, but reality standing before her. Yet despite the revelation, she wasn't afraid. "Not of him, why me?" she asked, stepping closer, her hand still on Luca. "What am I to you, to them?" Thorne's eyes softened, the amber fading to a deep human brown. "You're my mate," he said, the words raw, almost torn from him. "The one the moon chose for me. I've felt it since you found Luca, since you looked at me like you saw me, not the monster. But it's dangerous, Elara. The pack. They don't accept outsiders, especially not humans." Her heart stuttered, the word mate igniting a spark deep within her. It explained the pull, the inexplicable connection that had drawn her to him from the start. But it also explained the danger, the wolves circling closer now, their snarls growing louder. I'm not just human, am I? She asked, her voice trembling with the weight of the question. Cale said the woods are singing my name. What does that mean? Before Thorne could answer, a low, guttural howl split the night, and Cale stepped from the trees. Not as a wolf, but as a man, his lean frame radiating menace. The pack flanked him, their eyes locked on Elara, and she felt their gaze like a physical weight, pressing against her chest. Thorne growled, stepping in front of her, his body vibrating with barely restrained power. You can't protect her forever, Blackwood, Cale said, his voice smooth but edged with venom. She's not yours to keep. The blood moon's chosen her, and the pack will have its due. Over my dead body, Thorne snarled, his voice carrying a power that made the air hum. Ilara's skin tingled, the moon's light seeming to pulse in time with her heartbeat. Cale's smirk widened. That can be arranged. He raised a hand, and the wolves advanced, their snarls a deafening chorus. Thorne turned to Elara, his eyes blazing with urgency. Get inside, now. Take Luca. No, she said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her. I'm not leaving you. His expression softened, a flicker of pride breaking through the tension. You're impossible, he murmured, then grabbed her hand, pulling her close. Stay by me then. Whatever happens, don't let go, she nodded, her fingers tightening around his as Luca pressed against her leg, his growl a small but fierce echo of Thorne's. The pack closed in, their movements coordinated, predatory, but Thorne stood his ground, his presence commanding, almost regal. Elara felt it then. A surge of energy, like a current running through her, connecting her to Thorne, to Luca, to the very forest itself. It was as if the moon was waking something inside her, something dormant, something powerful. Thorne, she whispered, her voice trembling with awe. I feel it, the moon. It's calling me. His eyes widened, a mix of fear and wonder. That's impossible, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. You're human, am I? She asked, her heart racing as the energy surged again, stronger now, like a heartbeat in sync with the moon's light. Before he could respond, Cale lunged, his body blurring as he shifted mid-stride, his human form giving way to a massive gray wolf. Thorne pushed Elara behind him, his own body trembling, and she saw it. The ripple under his skin, the flash of amber in his eyes, the moment he teetered on the edge of transformation. Stay back, he roared, his voice half human, half beast. The pack attacked, a whirlwind of fur and teeth, but Thorne met them head-on, his movements a blur of strength and grace. Elara clutched Luca, her heart pounding as she watched, helpless but refusing to look away. Thorne fought like a force of nature, his body shifting between man and something more, his growls echoing with a power that shook the ground. But there were too many, and Cale's teeth grazed Thorne's shoulder, drawing blood. Elara's fear snapped into rage, a fire igniting inside her. She didn't know what she was doing, but she stepped forward, her voice ringing out. Stop. The word carried a weight she didn't understand, a command that seemed to ripple through the air. The wolves froze, their eyes turning to her, and even Cale hesitated, his snarl faltering. Thorne turned, his face a mask of shock and blood, his eyes wide. Elara, he breathed, what did you do? She didn't know, but the moon's light pulsed stronger now, and as Cale's pack regrouped, she felt the truth rising, a secret about herself she was only beginning to grasp. The fight wasn't over, but she was no longer just a bystander. She was part of this, bound to Thorne, to the pack, to the moon itself. Chapter 10. The Moon's Embrace. The moonlight bathed the clearing in a silver glow, its power a living force that pulsed through Elara's veins, amplifying the strange energy that had erupted from her when she'd shouted at the pack. The wolves stood frozen, their eyes wide and wary, fixed on her as if she were the predator now. Cale, still in his massive gray wolf form, hesitated, his snarl fading into a low, uncertain growl. Thorne's bloodied shoulder glistened under the moon, his face a mix of shock and awe as he stared at her, his amber eyes searching for answers she didn't have. Luca pressed against her leg, his small body trembling but steady, as if he too felt the shift in the air. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what came next. "Elara," Thorne said, his voice rough with pain and wonder. "How did you do that?" "I don't know," she admitted, her heart racing as the energy surged again, warm and electric, like a current tying her to the moon, to Thorne, to the very earth beneath her feet. "But I felt it. The moon, it's part of me." Cale's form shimmered, his wolf body blurring as he shifted back to human, his lean frame tense, his eyes glinting with a mix of fear and fascination. "You're no ordinary human," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. "The blood moon's chosen you." "You're one of us," Thorne growled, stepping between Elara and Kyle, his body still poised on the edge of transformation. "She's not yours," he snarled, his voice carrying a power that made the air hum. "She's mine." The word mine hit Elara like a wave, igniting the spark of their bond, the mate connection Thorne had confessed under the moon's gaze. Her chest ached with the weight of it, a truth that felt both impossible and inevitable. She stepped forward, her hand finding Thorne's arm, grounding him as much as herself. "I'm not anyone's," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "But I'm with him, and I'm not leaving." Kale's smirk returned, but it was strained, uncertain. "You don't know what you are, girl. The moon's power runs through you, but it's raw, untamed. Without guidance, it'll destroy you. And him." "Enough," Thorne snapped, his body trembling, the ripple under his skin more pronounced now. Elara felt it too. The moon's pull tugging at him, urging him to let go, to embrace the beast within. But he fought it, his eyes locked on hers, a silent plea for her to stay, to trust him. She squeezed his arm, her resolve unshaken. "I'm not afraid," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Whatever I am, whatever this is, we face it together." The pack shifted, their growls rising again, but they didn't advance. Kale's eyes narrowed, studying her, then Thorne. "The blood moon doesn't lie," he said, his voice cold. "She's part of the prophecy, Blackwood. You can't deny it. The pack will claim her one way or another." "Prophecy?" Elara asked, her heart pounding. "What prophecy?" Thorne's jaw tightened, but before he could answer, Kale raised a hand, and the pack surged forward, a wave of fur and teeth. Thorne roared, his body finally giving in to the moon's call. Elara's breath caught as his form blurred, muscles rippling, bones shifting, until a massive black wolf stood where he'd been, its amber eyes blazing with a fierce protectiveness. Luca barked, his small form darting to Thorne's side, and Elara felt a surge of pride and fear as she watched them face the pack together. The fight was chaos, a blur of snarls and claws. But Thorne moved with a strength and grace that took her breath away. He was magnificent, a force of nature, his black fur gleaming under the moon as he drove the pack back, Luca nipping at their heels. Elara's heart pounded, the energy inside her surging, urging her to act. She didn't know how, but she stepped forward, her voice ringing out again. "Stop!" The command was stronger this time, a pulse of power that rippled through the clearing, freezing the wolves mid-stride. Even Thorne paused, his wolf form turning to her, his eyes wide with recognition. Kale, still human, staggered back, his face pale. "You're the catalyst," he whispered, his voice trembling. "The one to break the curse, or bind us to it forever." Elara's mind reeled, the word catalyst echoing with Kale's earlier warnings about the prophecy. She didn't understand, but the energy inside her felt alive, tied to the moon, to Thorne, to the pack. "What does that mean?" she demanded, stepping toward Kyle, fearless now. Thorne shifted back to human form, his chest heaving, blood streaking his torn shirt. He grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "Don't listen to him," he said, his voice raw. "He'll say anything to control you." Kel laughed, a bitter sound. "Control her? She's beyond that now." The moon's awakened her. "She's the key to our freedom or our damnation." "Choose wisely, Blackwood," the pack retreated, their eyes still on Elara, but they followed Kyle as he melted into the trees, his final words lingering like a curse. The prophecy will find you, whether you run or not. Thorne pulled subcommittee on armed services close, his arms wrapping around her, his breath ragged against her hair. You're okay, he murmured, more to himself than to her. You're okay. She clung to him, her hands fisting in his shirt, the reality of his transformation, of her own power, sinking in. What am I, Thorne? She whispered, her voice trembling. What's the prophecy? He pulled back, his eyes searching hers, a mix of love and fear. I don't know everything, he admitted, his voice soft. But there's an old story passed down through the pack. A human born under the blood moon, destined to change us, free us from the curse or bind us to it forever. I didn't believe it until you. Your presence, your power. It's real, Elara. Her heart ached, the weight of his words overwhelming. And you? What do I mean to you? He cupped her face, his thumbs brushing her cheeks, his eyes steady despite the storm behind them. You're my mate, my anchor, my everything. I've spent years running from this life, but you make me want to fight for it. For us. Tears stung her eyes, and she leaned into his touch, the bond between them a tangible force, stronger than the moon itself. Then we fight, she said, her voice steady. Together. Luca nudged her leg, his warmth grounding them, and Thorne smiled, a rare, genuine smile that lit up his face. Together, he echoed, pulling her close again. The moon hung high, its light softening as the clouds parted, and Elara felt a sense of peace, however fragile. The prophecy, the pack, the curse, they were battles for another day. For now, she had Thorne, Luca, and a truth that was hers to shape. As they turned back to the cabin, hand in hand, the forest seemed to hum with approval, the moon's embrace a promise of what was to come.